Good vach. We are up to Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, and we are going to let's begin from 103a, 103a second column. When Omer Hamaka b'kornas al asadan, if a person strikes the hammer on the anvil is that metal thing. The person strikes with the hammer on the anvil, you are going to be liable. So ask the Gemara, Mike Avid, what did you do? You just hit the hammer against the anvil. What's the problem? Rabbi Rav Yosef because the person's training their hands. What does this mean? My kids make fun of me whenever I go and knock on a door. I usually do like a ghost knock. I go like this, and then I knock. And I'm trying to calibrate, not too loud, not too soft. And so I end up doing a little bit of a knock in the air, and then I knock. So that's the idea. The person is training themselves. They're getting ready to hit the metal that they have to hit. So first they hit the anvil, boom, 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 and then they're ready. They're in a good motion, and they go and they hit the actual metal, okay, with the thing that they're trying to hit with their hammer. Kasha b'nei rachava. On the outer, according to this, chaza umanusa b'shavs v'gamar hachem namid b'chayev. Wait, so basically you're telling me the person's just preparing to do something, you're going to be chayev. So let's say a person just walks by a construction site, and they're watching, they're taking notes in their head, and they're thinking to themselves, this is interesting what they're doing. So you're preparing for something you're going to do later on. Without doing a malacha, you're going to be chayev? That can't be. If you're telling me the whole reason you're chayev is just because you're hitting the anvil so that you could hit something else, that shouldn't be a reason. The reason that you're going to be chayev is because the people who pounded the sheets of gold for the Mishkan did exactly this. What does this mean? So the sheets of the Mishkan were very thin, and so when you're hitting it with a hammer, you want to make sure the hammer is smooth. If it's not smooth, it could go ahead, it could puncture the sheet of metal, and therefore what they would do is they hit against the anvil. By hitting it against the anvil, they make sure that the hammer is completely smooth, and then they could go ahead and hit the sheets of metal. And so basically what you're doing is you're actually smoothing out, making straight the hammer before hitting the sheets of metal, and this would be done every once in a while to make sure that it remains smooth so that it doesn't puncture the sheets of metal. Tanan Amihach, we have a brisa which supports this from Shimon Gamliel Omer, exactly that. The reason you're chayav for hitting the hammer against the anvil is because those who pounded the sheets of gold for the Mishkan did exactly this. Says the Mishnah, Chorish Kosher, a person who plows any amount. Hamanakesh, a person who weeds any amount. V'makarsem, a person who prunes dry branches. V'mazared, a person who prunes young shoots. Kolshu, in any amount. Chayav, you're going to be chayav. Why are you chayav? Because any amount helps it. It basically goes ahead and enhances when you plow, we're going to come back to why you're chayav for any amount, but when you weed, when you prune dry branches, what it's doing is it's enhancing that remains behind. If I pull out weeds, I've just enhanced my field, and therefore I'm going to be chayav. Okay? Hamalakid, some person who gathers wood, cutting branches off, imlasakin, if their intent is to improve the trees or the soil over there, kolshein, any amount, because again, as long as I remove any amount, it's going to impact the soil. Imlahestik, if I'm collecting the wood to make a fire, it has to be the measurement of wood needed to cook an easily cooked egg. We've had this measurement many times before. Hamalakid, a person who gathers grass, imlasakin, if you're improving the soil, kolshu, any amount. Imlabehema, if you're doing it for animal fodder, kimlofi hagdi, it's the measurement of a kid's mouthful. Okay, we've also seen that measurement before. Ask the Gemara, the plowing of a tiny amount, what's it fit for? What's it fit for? Chazi levezra dekara, for planting a pumpkin seed. Apparently a pumpkin seed just needs a very small amount, a small hole, and therefore even if you plow a tiny amount, it's big enough to plant a pumpkin seed, and therefore going to be chayiv. Similarly in the Mishkan, when they would prepare dyes, they would sometimes plant one stalk of a herb needed for the production of a particular dye, and so they would just plant one particular thing. Okay, says the Gemara further, analyzing further in the Mishnah, Hamenakesh, Makarsem, Vamizar, a person weeds, prunes branches, or prunes young shoots. Tana Rabbanim, Tana Brayza, Tolish Alash, and a person who plucks endives. Vamizared, Zeradim, or prunes reeds. Imlachila, if it's being done for consumption, Kigrogeras. The amount that you're chayav for is the amount of a dried fig. Imla Vehema, if it's being fed for an animal, Kimlofi Hagdit, the measurement is a kid's mouthful. In the Hesek, if you're making a fire, it's the measurement required to cook an easily cooked egg. In liyapis zakarka, if the goal is to improve the ground, to make it look nicer, kol shein, any amount. Ask the Gemara, atu kula liyapis zakarka. And at the end of the day, even if your intent is to feed your animal, but if I'm plucking certain things, which by definition, by taking them out, it's going to improve the land. So at the end of the day, all these things improve the land. So all these things, so as long as you take one tiny amount, you should be chayav. Why we have all these measurements depending on your intention, all that. Bottom line is, if I take whatever amount I'm taking, by definition, it is improving the land. So Rabbi Rav Yosef Tarvayu, but Agam Shanu, we're talking about a very particular case or it could be talking about a particular case where it's in a swamp. If it's in a swamp and you're pulling out a weed, it's not improving the ground, it's a muddy swamp. And therefore, it's not going to improve the grounds. And there, you have these measurements. Is it for feeding? Is it for fire? And then you have these different measurements. But it's true, if it was done in your backyard and you're pulling out weeds, even if you're doing it to feed an animal, you'd be chayav for a smaller amount, because even though the animal needs a larger amount, but as soon as you pull one weed out, you're improving your ground, and therefore you're going to be chayav for that. However, we have another answer. Even if it's in your back, even if it's in a yard, it's not a swamp, you still will not be chayav for improving the land when I'm plucking for the sake of my animal or for the sake of a fire. Why? As long as I don't have intention. Ask the Gemara. Okay, so we have machlokas we've discussed many times before, and that is something called davar she'eino miskaven. If I'm doing something without an intention, Rav Shimon says you're going to be patur. What's the classic example? The classic example is if you have a heavy bench, and you're pulling it in your backyard, it's not necessarily going to plow, and it's not your intention to plow, so it's called davar she'eino miskaven. The Chacham would say you're chayav. Rav Shimon says it's not my intention, therefore I'm going to be patur. However, even Rav Shimon says that davar she'eino miskaven patur, if it's a psik ratio, which means if it's inevitable that it's going to happen, then I will be chayav. So for example, let's just use the bench case. If it's really muddy that day and the soil is really soft and I'm pulling a bench, by definition it's going to plow a furrow, and therefore I'm going to be chayav. That's a psik ratio. It's inevitably going to happen. So the Gemara asks on Abaye's answer. Abaye says, oh, it's my intention. We say your intention doesn't matter. Granted, it's a davar she'eino miskaven, and granted we hold like Rav Shimon who says you're exempt for a davar she'eino miskaven. But over here it's a psik ratio. It is definitely going to improve the field. Answers the Gemara, very important answer. I'm doing it in my friend's field, so granted it's improving his field, but I don't care about that. I'm taking these branches or these weeds because I want to feed my dog, okay? And therefore that's what I care about. And it's true, it enhances this person's yard, but I don't care about that. That's lo ichbisli. It doesn't matter to me whatsoever, and therefore I'm going to be exempt. Now, why is this so relevant? Many of you have a ring on your door, right? So some of the rings, they have a feature where you go next to it, it flashes, the light flashes, okay? So on Shabbos, what happens? I'm walking outside and I'm walking up to the door and I cause a light to flash. Now, is my intent for this light to flash? Absolutely not. I don't care about this light. I'm going to my friend's house, right? It's a davar she'eino miskaven, right? But the point is it's a psik ratio. It's inevitable. As soon as I go next to that door, it's going to happen. But it's a psik ratio de lo ichbisli. I couldn't care less about this flashing light. And therefore now we come into machlokes. The question is now, when we say that according to Rav Shimon, a davar she'eino miskaven psik ratio de lo ichbisle is mutter, is that only b'diavad or even lechatchila? Okay, so big ramifications. Let's say I want to go to my so bottom line is the bottom line halacha is like this. Bottom line halacha is if a person's stuck. I remember a while ago, my wife and I had an Airbnb on Shabbos, and we realized in the middle of Shabbos that there was a little lights, that goes off a motion sensor, right? But it wasn't attached to an alarm, so it wasn't even helping me. So it was leichbisli, I couldn't care less about it. So we were allowed to move, we didn't get stuck and frozen for all of Shabbos. We're allowed to move, and we placed something on top of the thing, and that was it, okay? But we don't lechatchila try to get in the way of that. Where it gets much more problematic is if it's your house. If it's your ring, you do want that light. You do want the light. Maybe you don't want the light to flash when you go by, but you want that light. What's the purpose of the light? It scares off a robber, right? So you want that light because it's reminding anyone walking by that, hey, you're on camera. So if a person has a ring, so if you walk up to a house with a ring and it has the flashing light, okay, b'diavad, it's going to be okay. But if you're the homeowner and you forgot to take off the sensor, you'd have to walk through the backyard because, go through a different door because it is something which is ichbis lechad. It's something which you care about, and therefore even though it's a davar she'eino miskaven, it's a psik ratio, and you do care about it, and therefore it'd be problematic. Okay, says the new Mishnah, kosev shtei osios, this person writes two letters, bein b'yamino bein b'smolo, whether it's his right hand or left hand, and that's odd. Normally we have to do things in the normal fashion, so whether right hand or left hand, whether it's one character, meaning the same character, meaning AA, Aleph, Aleph, or of two characters, Aleph, Beis. Whether it's two inks, like blue and red, any language, you're going to be chayiv. Amar Rav Yossi, the whole reason that writing was asur is because of marking. They would write on the boards of the Mishkan, Leda, Ezev, and Zugo. So let's say you have, this happens in my sukkah all the time. Well, I used to build my own sukkah, but my family gave up on me. And so what would happen every year is that I would always build the sukkah and build it upside down, and basically by the time it comes to put the door in, the door had to go in a very particular way. We'd always realize, whoops, it did the whole thing upside down. I have to start all over again and build it all over again. Okay, so finally my son got smart, or my wife, I think it was my son, and he put like a little arrow up, down, and so we would not make this same mistake every single time. So that's what they did in the Mishkan. In the Mishkan, they wanted to know up and down and which two boards go next to each other. So they had a little sign. It's a little like line over here, a line over here. So Rav Yossi is saying, you don't have to write letters. Even if you write line, asterisk, that's sufficient, because that's what they would do in the Mishkan. They would have a sign over here and a sign over here. They'd be side by side, and that's the thing. So even though it's not letters, you would still be chayiv. Rabbi Yehuda, Matzinu Shem Katab B'Shem Gadol. He says you find a short word that's part of a long word, meaning Shem Mishimon Umishmuel. Person writes Shin Mem, and that is the beginning of the name Shimon, but you spelled a name, even though your intention was to write a longer name, you still spelled the name. Noach minachar, Dami Daniel, Gami Gadil. These are just examples of two letters which are real words or names which are part of a longer word. Ask the Gemara, Bishlam Yom Lechayev Mishum Derech Tzibukach, Elasma Mai Hein Derech Tzibukach. The Gemara asks what we just alluded to earlier. Why are you chayev when you write with your left hand? It's not the normal way to write. Rav Yirmiyah be'iter yad shana. We're talking about a person who is a lefty, and that's where chayev you write with your left hand. Ask the Gemara, have a small diday kiyam dechuli yama v'smal lechayev. That's not a good answer, because at the end of the day, whenever the Gemara tells us you do something with your right hand, you do something normally, right hand is just another way of saying your strong hand. So the Mishnah, by telling us if you're right or left, doesn't sound like it's saying you write with your strong hand if you're a righty, or your strong hand if you're a lefty. What it says is your right and your left, which implies your strong hand and your weak hand. So what's going on? We're talking about a person who is ambidextrous, even if they're stronger with their right hand, or vice versa, even if you write with either hand, as long as you're ambidextrous, you're going to be chayev. New answer of Yaakov Rei Tavas Yaakov Amar Hamani Rav Yossi Hida Amar Lachivish Osius Amishum Roshim. We say no. Maybe the author of that opening line was Rav Yossi. What did Rav Yossi tell us? You're chayev even for two symbols, right? A symbol. If I just had to make up two lines, right? If I do them with my right hand or my left hand, it's not going to be very complicated. So I could do that easily with my left hand. And that's why I'm going to be chayev with my left hand, because we're talking about just making a symbol. Okay. So says the Gemara, Hamani Sefer Rav Yossi, he Reisha Lav Rav Yossi. The Gemara asks, wait a second. Further on in the Mishnah, it quotes Rav Yossi. So it sounds like the later part is Rav Yossi, the earlier part is not Rav Yossi. Answer the Gemara, no, Kul Rav Yossi, it's fine. The entire Mishnah can be Rav Yossi, and only later does it specify that this is a statement of Rav Yossi. Rav Yehuda. Then we go to Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says we find a short name, Matzino. We find a short name that's part of a long name. For example, the examples he gives is Shem Mishimon, or Shem from Shmuel, right? But these are two letters, two distinct characters, Shem, Shin, and Mem. Ella Rav Yehuda, so the Gemara says, we can infer from here, Shtei Osios v'hein Shnei Shem Osun Mechayev. You're only going to be chayev for two letters that are two distinct characters. Shtei Osios v'hein Shem Echad lo Mechayev. But for two letters, the same character, you would not be chayev. Tani we learned in the Brayso v'asa achas. Okay, the pasuk says in regards to Karban Chatos, he will do one. Yachal amefad achi yachtav kol Hashem. I have to write the entire word. Vachi kol beged until I weave the entire garment. Vachi yasa kol hanafa until I make the entire sieve. Tamalomer me achas. It says from one, implying I don't have to make the entire item. Right on Shabbos, if I don't have to make the entire piece of clothing to be chayev for sewing. I could do less than that, but says the Gemara, if I would just have the word me'achas from one, which implies not the complete thing, a partial, so Yachla would have thought, I would have thought, even if I write one letter, or only make one, weave one thread, or make one heddle eye of the sieve. In other words, just do a tiny bit. Tamalomer achas. The pasuk says one, implying I have to do a whole thing. So now I have a contradiction. Me'achas implies I don't have to do a whole thing. Achas implies I do a whole thing. Kate said, how do you reconcile this contradiction? The idea is you don't have to do an entire thing, but it still has to be meaningful. So what's the example of that when it comes to writing? I write a small name, which is part of a larger name. What's the example? Shem Mishmuel, Shem Mishimon Mishmuel, Noach Minachar, Dami Daniel, Gad Mi Gadiel. Okay, that's the opening opinion. That's the opinion of the Tanakh. Yehuda Omer Afilu Kasav El Shtei Osios Ve'Hein Shem Echad Chai. Yehuda says even bigger novelty. Even if I write two letters, the same character, which is part of a name, I'm going to be chayev. Kigon, for example, sheish, which means marble, or six. Taste, which means to give. Rar, which means to ooze. Gag, a roof. Chach, okay, a bracelet. Okay, so those are all different cases where I have two letters of the exact same thing. Now, obviously, that's where the contradiction is. We're just going to keep on reading this brisa, and we'll analyze the brisa again tomorrow. But at this point, we already have the contradiction, because Rehuda, in our Mishnah, we inferred the example he gave was Shem from Shimon. Over here, he's saying, even if I write Sheish, which is two characters which are the same character, and still he says you're going to be chayev, still you're going to be liable. Okay, but let's continue the brisa. So first, Rav Yossi argues with Mishum Kosev Chayev, am I liable for writing? Valo eno chayev Mishum Roshem. The whole liability comes from marking. They would mark the boards of the Mishkan. Later, Ezehu ben Zugo, to know which one was its pair, its mate. A person scratches one scratch on two boards, or two scratches on one board. I'm going to be chayev, even though you didn't write any letters. That's the opinion of Rav Yossi, like we saw in the Mishnah. The Gemara continues. Rav Shimon Omer v'asa achas, which is basically the exact same thing as the Tanakhama. The Gemara is going to ask. Rav Shimon is basically saying the same thing as Tanakhama. I'm just going to read it, but he's literally saying the same thing we saw. Vasa achas yachal shito is called Hashem. I would have thought I'd do the whole thing. Ashir is called beged. Ashir is called nafas. Hamlomer me'achas says from one. Ime'achas if it's from one. Yachal afilu kasav ela os achas. Even if I only wrote one letter. Afilu argel achut echad. If I only did one thread. Afilu asa ela bais echad banafe. Even if I did one heddle eye of the sieve. Tamalomer achas one. It sounds like I have to do the whole complete thing. Hakei said, how do you reconcile? I'm only liable when I perform a labor that is of a type which endures. We'll see exactly what he means. Rav Yossi Omer, v'asa achas v'asa hena. I do one, I do them. Okay, those are two psukim. Teaching me that sometimes I'm chayav one for a bunch of different things. And sometimes I'm going to be chayav for each and every one of the transgressions. We'll see what all this means. Tanimiya, bottom line is the Brisa taught Rabbi Yehuda Omer afilu kasav el shtei osos v'nshneim echad chayav. We see over here if I did two letters of the same character, I'm going to be chayav. And yet in our Mishnah, he said you have to be two different characters. Okash is not a difficulty. Hadi Deva Hadi Rabbe. In our Mishnah, it's Yehuda's own view. In the Brisa over here, it is the view of his teacher. The Tanya. Now we have a Brisa which supports this answer. Yehuda Mishum Rabban Gamliel. Yehuda says the name of Rabban Gamliel. Afilu kasav el shtei osos v'nshneim echad chayav kikon sheish teis rar gag chach. We see Rabbi Yehuda saying in the name of Rabban Gamliel, I could write two letters of the same character. But that's the view of his Rebbe. His own view is that they specifically have to be different characters, two letters of the same character. Then I will not be chayav. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful week.